Kicked out at 17, he and his sister found a hidden cave in the forest. What it became saved them. If you've ever felt like the world was pushing you out with nowhere to go, then this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button if you believe in second chances, because we're going to talk a lot about those here. The day I turned 18 felt less like a birthday and more like an eviction. It happened in a room painted the color of weak tea, a shade I'm convinced is manufactured specifically for government buildings to gently numb the soul. The air smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant. Outside, a relentless November rain washed the city gray. My social worker, Ms. Albright, sat across from me at a metal desk, her smile as thin and worn as the file resting between her hands. She had kind eyes, but they were tired. Everyone in the system had tired eyes. "Well, Leo," she said, her voice attempting a cheerfulness that didn't reach the corners of the room. "This is it. You're officially an adult." She slid a thick manila envelope across the desk. It landed with a soft, final thud. Inside was my life, summarized in forms and assessments: birth certificate, social security card, a final placement report that probably described me as resourceful but withdrawn. The documentation of a childhood spent in transit. I didn't feel like an adult. I felt like a ship being untied from a dock in the middle of a storm. For 2 years since Gran's death, the group home had been my anchor, however unsteady. It wasn't home, not even close, but it had walls and a roof and a schedule. It had predictability. Now, all I had was this envelope and a bus token she would give me in a few minutes. "There's also this," she said, pulling a small, square box from her desk drawer. It was wrapped in brown paper, faded and soft with age, tied with a piece of twine that had gone brittle. My name was written on it in a familiar, looping script, Gran's handwriting. "It was left in your grandmother's effects. The instructions were to give it to you on your 18th birthday. We've had it in storage." I took the box. It was light, almost empty. The feeling of that paper under my fingertips was electric. A direct line back to a time before rooms like this, before files and assessments. A time of warm kitchens and the smell of baking bread and the low hum of her voice telling me stories. Grief, which I usually kept packed down tight, pricked at the back of my throat. "What about Maya?" I asked, my voice coming out rougher than I intended. Ms. Albright's professional calm settled back over her face. "Maya's placement is stable. She's only 14, Leo. She'll remain in the state's care until she's of age or a permanent guardianship is established." "Her permanent guardian is me," I said, the words tasting like metal. I'd been saying it for 2 years. I'd been saying it since the day they came to Gran's house, the day they told us she was gone and that we couldn't stay. "You know it's not that simple," she said softly. "You have no home, no income. The court won't even consider it until you can prove stability." Stability. The word was a joke. They were kicking me out with less than $100 in my pocket, my final allowance and earnings from a part-time dishwashing job, and telling me to find stability. It was like telling someone to build a house without giving them nails. I stared at the box in my hands. Gran had left this for me. She had known this day was coming. The thought was both a comfort and a fresh wound. She had known, and she had still died, leaving us to this. The anger I felt was old and familiar, a bitter companion to the grief. "So I just leave?" I asked, the question hanging in the sterile air. "And she just stays?" "You can call her. You can write." "Once you're settled?" You can arrange visits through her case manager. She gave me a pamphlet with phone numbers on it, another piece of paper to add to the stack. Leo, this is your chance to build something for yourself, so you can be ready for her. She was trying to be encouraging, I knew. She was trying to frame it as a beginning, not an end. But all I could feel was the tearing, the final official severing of the last tie that held me and my sister together. For the past 2 years, we'd been in different foster homes, then a group home for me and another for her, but we were in the same system. We were in it together. Now, I was out, and she was in, alone. I stood up, the legs of the cheap chair scraping against the linoleum. I clutched the manila envelope in the small, precious box. My entire past and my non-existent future, all right there in my hands. "Good luck, Leo," Ms. Albright said, her voice thick with an emotion she wasn't supposed to show. I didn't answer. I just walked out of the office, down the long, quiet hallway, and pushed through the heavy glass doors. The cold, wet air of the city hit me like a slap. The rain hadn't let up. It ran in sheets down the concrete, blurring the traffic lights into halos of red and green. I stood under the meager awning, the sounds of the city a dull roar in my ears. I was 18. I was free, and I had never felt so completely and utterly lost. Freedom, it turned out, was just another word for being alone. With my sister still trapped inside the maze I had just been ejected from, it felt more like a punishment than a prize. The little box from my grandmother felt heavy now, impossibly heavy, as if it contained the weight of every promise I'd ever made. I found a bus stop with a leaky shelter and sat on the cold plastic bench, the city's grime clinging to everything. The rain dripped rhythmically from a crack in the fiberglass roof, a miserable, off-key metronome counting down the seconds of my new life. I couldn't bring myself to open the box. Not yet. To open it felt like accepting that this was real, that the flimsy paper it was wrapped in was the only piece of my grandmother I had left. Instead, I opened the big manila envelope. The documents were cold and impersonal, official. They declared me Leo Vance, born 18 years ago, now a legal adult with all the rights and responsibilities that entailed. It was a joke. The right to be homeless, the responsibility to not starve. I traced my name on the birth certificate. It looked like someone else's. The boy who'd lived with his gran, who'd built forts in the woods behind her house and believed her stories about magic in the trees. He wasn't a legal adult. He was just a kid, and he was long gone. My phone, a cheap prepaid model with a cracked screen, buzzed in my pocket. A text from Maya. "Happy birthday, old man. Did they let you out yet?" My thumbs hovered over the screen. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell her I had a plan, a place to go, that I'd be coming for her next week. But we never lied to each other. It was the one rule we had. "Yeah, I'm out," I typed back. "Got your present." The lie was in the word present. The box from Gran was for me, but the real present I was supposed to give Maya was a life together, a home, and I had failed. Her reply was instant. "Is it weird, being outside?" "It's wet," I wrote. It was the truest thing I could say. Finally, my fingers, numb with cold, fumbled with the twine on the small box. It snapped easily. I peeled back the soft, worn paper. Inside, nestled on a bed of yellowed cotton, were 3 things. The first was a key. It was old, made of heavy, tarnished brass, with an ornate circular head and a complex, toothed bit. It looked like something from a fairy tale, a key to a secret garden or a dragon's hoard. The second was a folded piece of paper, brittle at the creases. I carefully unfolded it. It was a map, hand-drawn in black ink, the paper yellowed like an ancient treasure chart. I recognized the layout immediately. It was Gran's property. The small square cabin, the creek that ran along the western edge, the dense cluster of pines to the north. But there was a path drawn on it that I didn't recognize, a dotted line that led from the back of the cabin deep into the woods, ending at a crudely drawn symbol of a rock face marked with a large X. The third item was a letter, a single folded sheet, my name on the front. Gran's script was shaky, different from the confident loops I remembered. This was written near the end. My hands trembled as I opened it. My dearest Leo, if you are reading this, then I am gone, and you are a man. I am so sorry I had to leave you and Maya. Please know that not a day went by in that hospital that I didn't think of you both. There wasn't time to explain everything. They wouldn't have let me. But I left you what I could. This key and this map are for you. The property in Silver Creek is yours now. It is all I had to give. Don't let anyone tell you it's worthless. Its value isn't in the land, but in its freedom. There is a lawyer in town, a Mr. Henderson. He is an old friend and can be trusted. He holds the deed. Show him this letter. Trust him, but trust your own heart more. Go there, Leo. Take the path on the map. What you find at the end is your real inheritance. It's not money. It's a chance. A place to stand your ground. Be brave for your sister. Everything I did to protect you both. Remember that. All my love, always. Gran. A chance. A place to stand your ground. The words echoed in the empty space inside me. She hadn't forgotten. She had a plan. It might be a strange, cryptic plan involving a fairy tale key and a treasure map, but it was more than I'd had 5 minutes ago. Silver Creek. It was a tiny town 100 miles north, a place we'd only visited a few times when I was very young. A place of tall trees and quiet roads. I showed the letter to Ms. Albright. She read it with a frown, her bureaucratic skepticism warring with the tired kindness in her eyes. Silver Creek? Leo, that property, according to the file, it's practically derelict, and there are years of back taxes owed. We looked into it when your grandmother passed. Selling it was deemed unfeasible. She says I own it, I insisted, my voice tight. She says to see a lawyer. Ms. Albright sighed, a long, weary sound. She looked from the letter to my face, and I saw a flicker of something, pity maybe, or a memory of a time before she was so worn down. She picked up her phone and made a call. I heard her say my name, then Silver Creek, then Henderson. After a few minutes of quiet murmuring, she hung up. He's there, she said, sounding surprised. He remembers your grandmother. He confirmed the deed is in your name, held in trust until your 18th birthday, which is today. She looked at me, really looked at me, for the first time all morning. The bus to Miller's Fork leaves in an hour. From there, it's a local line to Silver Creek. It's a long shot, Leo. It's the only shot I've got, I said. She nodded slowly. She went to a petty cash box and took out more than just a bus token. She pressed a handful of worn bills into my hand. Enough for the full ticket and a little extra. For food, she said, her voice low. Don't tell my supervisor. And just like that, the path of my life, which had been a dead end in a gray city, now forked. One direction was this, the streets, the shelters, the slow, grinding erosion of hope. The other was a bus ride into the unknown, toward a dilapidated cabin, a mountain of debt, and a mysterious X on a map. It wasn't much of a choice at all. It was the only choice. I was finally leaving. The bus ride was a slow-motion transition from one world to another. The city, with its concrete canyons and relentless noise, gradually dissolved behind us, giving way to sprawling suburbs, then wide-open farmland, and finally the dense, dark forests of the north. I watched the landscape change through the grimy window, my own reflection a ghostly presence superimposed over the passing trees. With every mile, the knot of anxiety in my stomach loosened just a little, replaced by a different kind of tension, the sharp, prickling awareness of the unknown. I thought about Gran. Her letter said everything she did was to protect us. But from what? We were poor, but we were happy. Her house was small, but it was filled with light and the smell of herbs from her garden. The system had told us a simple, sad story. An elderly woman with failing health, unable to care for 2 grandchildren, who eventually succumbed to illness, leaving them wards of the state. It was a neat, tidy narrative that fit perfectly into their forms. But Gran's letter hinted at something else, something hidden beneath the surface. Don't let anyone tell you it's worthless. Its value isn't in the land. What did that mean? The bus groaned and wheezed its way up into the mountains. The trees grew taller, thicker, ancient pines and firs that crowded the narrow road. The air that leaked through the window frames grew colder, cleaner, smelling of damp earth and pine needles. It was a smell I remembered from childhood, a smell I associated with Gran's hands after she'd been gardening. It was the smell of home. By the time we pulled into Silver Creek, the sun was setting, painting the undersides of the heavy clouds in shades of bruised purple and orange. The town wasn't much more than a single main street lined with old brick buildings. A diner with a flickering neon sign, a hardware store, a post office, and a handful of other storefronts, most of them dark. It was the kind of town that time seemed to have forgotten, quiet and still. A stray dog watched the bus pull away, then trotted off into an alley. The silence was immense. Mr. Henderson's office was on the second floor of the oldest building on the street, above a closed-down bakery. The sign on the door just said, T. Henderson, Attorney at Law. I knocked, my knuckles echoing in the silent hallway. The man who opened the door was as old as the building, with a fringe of white hair and a face etched with the deep lines of a long, thoughtful life. He wore a cardigan sweater and peered at me over a pair of reading glasses. "You must be Leo Vance," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly rumble. "I was sorry to hear about your grandmother. Eleanor was a fine woman, stubborn as a mule, but a fine woman." He led me into an office that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco. Files were stacked everywhere, on shelves, on the floor, on the corners of his massive wooden desk. He gestured for me to sit in a worn leather chair that sighed as I sank into it. "Ms. Albright called," he said, settling himself behind the desk. "Said you were on your way. Said you had a letter." I handed it to him. He read it slowly, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he folded it carefully and handed it back to me. "Stubborn as a mule," he repeated, almost to himself. He pulled a thick folder from a drawer. "This is you, or the land anyway. It's yours, free and clear of any mortgage. Eleanor made sure of that. Paid it off years ago." A flicker of hope ignited in my chest. "So, it's mine?" "It is," he said, and then he delivered the bad news. "However, there are also 4 years of unpaid property taxes. The town's been patient, mostly out of respect for your grandmother, but they won't be patient forever. We're talking several $1,000s. The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. Several thousand. I had $67 in my pocket. And then there's this, he continued, sliding a crisp, professional-looking letter across the desk. It was from a company called Pioneer Ridge Development Corporation. It was an offer to buy the property. A generous offer. More money than I had ever imagined seeing in one place. Enough to get a decent apartment, find a good job, and start the process of getting Maya back. Enough to build that stability Ms. Albright was talking about. They've been making this offer every 6 months for the last 2 years, Mr. Henderson said, watching me closely. They want the land for a new resort. They've been buying up parcels all over this mountain. I should sell, I said, the words feeling hollow and wrong. It was the smart thing to do, the only logical thing to do. Maybe, the lawyer said, or maybe you should read your grandmother's letter again. Its value isn't in the land. She was a smart woman, Leo. She never did anything without a reason. He took a set of keys from his desk drawer and added them to a ring with another, larger key. This one's for the cabin. This one's for the old truck in the shed. I put a new battery in it last week, just in case. It should run. He stood up, signaling the end of our meeting. Go on out there. Spend the night. See what you're sitting on before you decide to sell it to the first person who waves a checkbook at you. I took the keys. They felt heavy, a tangible weight of responsibility. Selling was the easy path. The path back to a world I understood. Gran's path, the one marked on the map, led somewhere else entirely. The drive out to the property was short, only a few miles out of town, but the road quickly turned from cracked pavement to gravel and then to a rutted dirt track. The old truck, a beat-up Ford Ranger from the 90s, rattled and groaned, its headlights cutting a weak yellow tunnel through the encroaching darkness. The trees pressed in on either side, their branches scratching at the windows like skeletal fingers. When I finally saw the cabin, my heart sank. Mr. Henderson had said derelict, and he hadn't been exaggerating. The roof sagged in the middle, the porch steps were rotted through, and the windows were dark, vacant eyes. It looked like it had been abandoned for decades, not 2 years. The woods were reclaiming it, ivy crawling up the walls, saplings pushing through the porch floorboards. I parked the truck and got out. The air was bitingly cold. The only sound was the wind whispering through the pines. For a moment, I was terrified. This was a mistake. I should have stayed in the city, taken my chances at a shelter. This place wasn't a home, it was a ruin. But then I looked past the cabin, into the dark woods, and I thought of the map in my pocket. Take the path. What you find at the end is your real inheritance. I took a deep breath, the cold air burning my lungs. I had to see. I had to know. I didn't even try the cabin. I retrieved a flashlight from the truck's glove box and unfolded the map. The dotted line started behind the cabin, near an old, gnarled oak tree I vaguely remembered. I found it easily enough. From there, the path was almost invisible, just a faint suggestion of a trail beneath years of fallen leaves and pine needles. I pushed my way through the undergrowth, the flashlight beam bouncing nervously ahead of me. The woods were darker, deeper than I remembered. Every snap of a twig, every rustle of leaves in the wind sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I felt small and exposed. I was a city kid, used to the predictable dangers of concrete and steel. This was different. This was a wild, ancient place. I walked for what felt like an hour, following the winding path on the map, climbing steadily uphill. My legs ached, and the cold was starting to seep into my bones. I was about to give up, to turn back and face the ruin of the cabin, when I saw it. Ahead of me, rising up out of the forest floor, was a sheer wall of granite, a cliff face 30 feet high, covered in moss and shadow. I swept the flashlight beam across the rock, looking for anything that matched the X on the map. And then I saw it. Not an X carved into the stone, but a subtle, unnatural straightness. A vertical line, almost perfectly concealed by a thick curtain of overgrown ivy. My heart started pounding. I pushed aside the heavy, clinging vines. Behind them was a door. A heavy, solid-looking door made of thick, dark planks of wood, banded with rusted iron. It was set flush into the rock face, so perfectly fitted that without the map you would never know it was there. And in the center of the door was a large, ornate iron lock, the exact size and shape of the brass key in my pocket. This was it. This was the end of the path. I stood there for a long moment, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand. This was Gran's secret, my inheritance. I took a deep, shuddering breath, reached into my pocket, and pulled out the key. The brass key felt cold and solid in my trembling hand. It slid into the iron lock with a smooth, satisfying click that seemed impossibly loud in the dead quiet of the forest. I turned it. For a moment, nothing happened. I put my shoulder to the heavy wooden door and pushed. It resisted, swollen with years of damp, but then with a deep, groaning shudder, it moved. The air that rolled out from the darkness within was cool, dry, and ancient. It smelled of stone and dust and something else, something faintly metallic and clean. It was not the smell of a damp, natural cave. It was the smell of a place that had been sealed and preserved. I shone my flashlight inside. It wasn't a cave, not really. It was a room, carved out of the solid rock. The walls were smooth, and the ceiling was high, reinforced with thick wooden beams. It was about the size of a one-car garage, completely dry and surprisingly clean, apart from a fine layer of dust coating everything. Against the far wall was a long, sturdy workbench, littered with tools I didn't recognize. Strange clamps, vices, and what looked like soldering equipment. Shelves lined one wall, holding neatly labeled jars and boxes. It looked like a workshop, a secret workshop. But my eyes were drawn to the object in the center of the room, a large, green metal footlocker, the kind soldiers use. It was sitting there, waiting, as if my grandmother had placed it there just yesterday. It wasn't locked. I knelt down, my heart hammering against my ribs, and I lifted the heavy lid. The inside was packed, not with gold or jewels, but with paper. Dozens and dozens of thick manila envelopes, each one sealed with wax and numbered in Gran's familiar script. On top of the stack was a single, thicker envelope, simply addressed to Leo. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. Inside was another letter, this one many pages long, and a stack of photographs. I sat down on the cold stone floor, leaned my back against the footlocker, and began to read. My dearest Leo, if you have found this place, then you have done what I hoped you would. You chose the harder path. I am proud of you already. This place was my sanctuary, and I hope it will become yours. I built it myself, year by year, with the help of a few trusted friends who are long gone now. It is safe here. No one knows it exists. I know you have questions. I know you are probably angry with me. I need you to understand why I did what I did. The story they told you about me being sick and unable to care for you. It was a lie, a necessary one. Your parents, my beautiful, reckless daughter, and the man she loved, did not die in a car accident. That was another story we told. The truth is much more complicated and much more dangerous. I had to stop reading. My head was spinning. A lie? All of it? I looked at the photographs. The first few were of me and Maya as little kids, smiling gap-toothed grins, sitting on Gran's lap. But then there were pictures of my parents. I barely remembered them. They were just faded, smiling ghosts from a life before my memory truly began. In the photos, they were young, vibrant, and happy. But in the last photo, a candid shot, they looked different. They were standing by a car, looking over their shoulders, their faces tight with fear. I took a shaky breath and continued reading. Your father was a journalist, a good one, an honest one. He was working on a big story, a story about a powerful corporation and the criminals it worked with. He uncovered things he wasn't supposed to see: bribery, intimidation, men who operated outside the law. This corporation, Pioneer Ridge, wasn't just building resorts. They were laundering money for some very dangerous people. Your father had proof, documents, recordings. He was going to expose them. Pioneer Ridge, the name from the letter in Mr. Henderson's office. The company that wanted to buy this land. It wasn't a coincidence. They found out. They came after him, after your mother. They didn't want to just silence them. They wanted what he had. One night, they came to your house. Your parents managed to get you and Maya out through a back window, telling you it was a game. They told you to run to my house and not look back. It was the last time you ever saw them. They disappeared. The police found their car abandoned miles away. No bodies, no note. They just vanished. The official story was that they ran off, abandoning their children. I squeezed my eyes shut, a wave of nausea rolling over me. A memory, fragmented and hazy, surfaced from the deep. Running through the dark, my mother's hand pushing my back, the smell of pine needles, fear, cold and sharp. I had always thought it was a nightmare, but it was real. I knew who was responsible, the letter went on, and I knew they would come for you next. They thought your father might have passed the evidence to his family, to me, or to you. I had to make you disappear. I had to hide you in the one place they would never think to look, right under their noses, in the foster care system. So I played the part, the heartbroken mother, the frail old woman, collapsing under the strain. I let them think I was incompetent. I let them take you. It was the hardest thing I have ever done, Leo. It broke my heart every single day. But it kept you alive. Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and silent. I wasn't crying for the parents I barely knew. I was crying for my grandmother, for the weight she had carried, the sacrifice she had made. The story of her abandoning us, of her weakness, was a lie. It was a shield. Her perceived failure was an act of profound, desperate love. And as I sat there, in the cold, dusty silence of her secret workshop, the full weight of it all came crashing down on me. The anger I had held on to for 2 years, the bitter resentment that she had left us, it all dissolved, replaced by a wave of grief so pure and overwhelming, it felt like I was drowning. I cried for the grandmother I had misunderstood. I cried for the years we had lost. I cried for the scared little boy who ran through the woods, and the young man who now held the terrible, beautiful truth in his hands. And I know some of you watching this have felt that same kind of moment. That moment when the story you've been told about your life, the story that has defined you, suddenly shatters, and you're left in the wreckage, not knowing who you are anymore. If you're there right now, or you've ever been there, let me know in the comments. You are not alone in that feeling. It's a terrifying place to be. But sometimes, it's also the place where you can finally start to build something real, something true. I sat on that cold stone floor for hours, the flashlight growing dim beside me. I read every word of Gran's letter, and then I read it again. I sorted through the numbered envelopes. Each one contained a piece of the puzzle. Copies of your father's notes, financial records detailing the money laundering, sworn affidavits from sources who had since disappeared. It was all there, the evidence he had died for. And at the bottom of the footlocker, beneath all the paper, was one last thing. It was a thick, waterproof pouch. Inside was cash. Neat bundles of 20s and 50s, held together with rubber bands. It wasn't a fortune, maybe $10,000. Gran's life savings, scraped together and hidden away. A note attached to it read, "For the taxes, and for a new beginning." The first gray light of dawn was filtering through the trees when I finally stumbled out of the cave. The world looked different. The trees seemed sharper, the air colder. The dilapidated cabin no longer looked like a ruin. It looked like a challenge. The overgrown land wasn't a worthless burden. It was a fortress. Gran hadn't left me a problem. She had left me a post, a place to stand my ground. The choice that had seemed so obvious yesterday, to sell, to take the money and run, was now impossible. Selling the land to Pioneer Ridge wasn't just giving up a piece of property. It was giving them the one thing my parents and my grandmother had died to protect. It was handing them their victory. And it would mean putting a price on my sister's safety. If they were still looking, if they still believed there was evidence here, selling the land would just put the money in our hands and a target on our backs. Our only safety was in the one thing they couldn't control, the ownership of this place itself. But what was the alternative? I was an 18-year-old kid with a stack of incriminating documents, a small pile of cash, and a sister trapped in the system. They were a multi-million-dollar corporation with a history of making people disappear. The thought was paralyzing. For a moment, the fear was so intense I wanted to crawl back into that cave, seal the door, and just wait. Then my phone buzzed. It was Maya. "You okay? You didn't text back." Her words cut through the fog of my fear. This wasn't just about me. It wasn't about avenging my parents or honoring my grandmother's memory. It was about her, about getting her out, about giving her the home we were supposed to have. Gran's letter said this place was a chance. It was a place to be brave for my sister. I typed back, my fingers stiff with cold. "I'm okay. I have a plan. It's a crazy plan, but it's a plan. I love you." "Love you too, weirdo," she replied instantly. That was all it took. The fear didn't go away, but something else rose up to meet it. Determination. A cold, hard resolve that settled deep in my bones. I knew what I had to do. I drove the rattling truck back into town, my mind racing. I parked in front of the diner, the only place open, and went inside. The smell of coffee and frying bacon was grounding. I ordered a huge breakfast and a coffee, and while I waited, I laid out Gran's map on the table. The dotted line, the X. It looked so simple, so childish, but it had led me to the truth. After I ate, feeling more human, I walked back to Mr. Henderson's office. It was early, not even 8 a.m., but a light was on. I knocked. He opened the door, a steaming mug of coffee in his hand, looking surprised to see me. "Leo, you're up early. Have a rough night in the cabin?" "I didn't stay in the cabin," I said. I walked past him into the office and put the heavy brass key on his desk. "My grandmother told me to trust you." He looked at the key, then at my face. He saw the change in me. The scared kid from yesterday was gone. "Eleanor said that, did she?" he murmured. "What did you find out there, son?" "The truth," I said. I took a deep breath. Pioneer Ridge Development. My grandmother wrote that they were a front, that my father was a journalist investigating them, that they're the reason my parents disappeared. Mr. Henderson went very still. He put his coffee mug down carefully. He stared at me for a long, silent moment, his expression guarded. "Those are very serious allegations, Leo. Your grandmother, she was grieving. Sometimes people invent stories to cope with tragedy." "She didn't invent it," I said, my voice low and steady. "She left proof." I didn't show him everything, not yet. Just one of the affidavits from a former employee of the company detailing illegal payoffs. I placed the yellowed paper on his desk. He picked it up and read it, his eyes scanning the lines, his bushy white eyebrows drawing together. He read it twice. When he looked up, the cautious, small-town lawyer was gone. In his place was the man my grandmother had trusted. His eyes were sharp, intelligent, and deeply serious. "Where did you get this?" he asked, his voice a low rumble. "In a safe place," I said. "There's more, a lot more. Notes, financial records, other sworn statements. Everything my father collected." He leaned back in his chair, a slow, heavy movement. He stared out the window at the quiet Main Street, but I knew he wasn't seeing it. He was seeing the past. "I told her this was a dangerous game," he whispered. "I told her to go to the feds. She said she couldn't trust them. Said they were paid off too. Said the only way to keep you kids safe was to hide, to make you ghosts." He looked at me, and his eyes were filled with a profound sadness. "She carried that burden alone for a long time." "Not anymore," I said. "I'm not selling. I'm fighting." He studied my face, searching for something. "This isn't a game, Leo. These people are not resort developers. They are criminals who have gotten away with murder. If they know you have this—" "They won't," I said. "But they're not getting the land, and I'm getting my sister back." That was the choice, right there in that dusty office. It was the moment I stopped being a victim of my circumstances and started making my own. It was terrifying, but it was also the first time in my life I felt truly powerful. I wasn't just a ward of the state anymore. I was Eleanor Vance's grandson, and I had a place to stand my ground. Mr. Henderson steepled his fingers, his gaze fixed on the affidavit. "Getting custody of Maya requires proving you can provide a stable home. A judge is not going to look kindly on a dilapidated cabin with no running water and an 18-year-old guardian with no job." "Then I'll fix it," I said, the words coming out with more confidence than I felt. "I have some money, enough to pay the taxes and buy materials, enough to start." He was quiet for a long time. I could hear the clock on the wall ticking, each second a hammer blow of doubt. Was I crazy? Could I really do this? Finally he nodded, a slow, deliberate motion. "All right, Leo," he said, his voice firm. "All right. Here's what we do. First, you pay those taxes, today. That stops any immediate threat of foreclosure. Second, I will file a preliminary injunction against Pioneer Ridge, citing irregularities in their original land surveys. It's a weak argument, but it will buy us time. It will bog them down in paperwork, and force them to respond, showing them that the property is no longer undefended. He leaned forward, his eyes locking with mine. While I tie them up in legal knots, you work. You make that cabin livable. You establish residency. You show the world you are building a home. And I, he said, a grim smile touching his lips, will start the paperwork to make the case for your guardianship of Maya. It will be a long, hard fight. But your grandmother was my friend, and I'll be damned if I let those vultures win. The fight began not with a bang, but with the scratching of a pen on a check. I walked into the town clerk's office with Mr. Henderson and paid 4 years of back taxes in cash. The clerk, a woman with a tightly permed hairdo, looked at the stack of bills with wide eyes, then at me. I could feel her reassessing me, the narrative in her head shifting from that poor orphaned Vance boy to something new, something uncertain. It was the first small victory. The next few months were the hardest of my life. The cave became my base of operations. I'd spend my days at the property and my nights there, sleeping on a cot I'd bought, surrounded by the ghosts of my family and the evidence that could either save us or get us killed. The cave was my secret, my vault. During the day, I worked on the cabin. Work was a brutal, humbling education. I knew nothing about construction, but the hardware store owner, a gruff man named Sal who remembered Gran, took a sort of pity on me. When I came in to buy roofing tar and lumber, he'd grunt and say, "You're doing it wrong," before spending 20 minutes showing me the right way to frame a wall or flash a window. He never smiled, but he'd always add an extra box of nails to my order and say, "Don't worry about it." I started with the roof, patching the leaks. Then I tore out the rotted porch and built a new one. I learned to plaster, to run plumbing, to wire an outlet without electrocuting myself. Every muscle in my body ached. My hands were a constant mess of cuts and calluses. Some days, the sheer scale of the task was overwhelming. I'd sit on the new porch steps, looking at the half-finished work, and the despair would be a physical weight. On those days, I would call Maya. I couldn't tell her the whole truth. I couldn't tell her about our parents, or the cave, or the danger. The calls were monitored, and I couldn't risk it. But I told her about the cabin. I told her I was fixing it for us. "You're building a house?" she'd ask, her voice a mix of disbelief and hope. "I'm trying," I'd say. "I'm putting in a window for your room. It looks out on the creek." "Does it have a dog?" she'd ask. It was her standard question for every potential future. "Not yet," I'd laugh. "But there's room for one." Those calls were my fuel. Her voice, her hope, was the reason I got up every morning and picked up a hammer again. Meanwhile, Mr. Henderson was a quiet storm in town. He filed the injunction. Pioneer Ridge's lawyers responded with dismissive arrogance, but they had to respond. He filed another motion. He requested old survey records. He created a blizzard of paperwork, a legal quagmire designed to do one thing: delay. And it worked. The letters from the developers stopped coming. For the first time in years, there was silence from them. A tense, watchful silence. Slowly, the cabin began to transform. It was still small and rustic, but it was solid. It was clean. I got the well pump working, and for the first time, there was running water. I installed a small wood stove, and its warmth pushed back the damp and the cold. I planted a small garden in the patch of earth Gran used to tend, turning over the soil and finding it still rich and dark. The property was coming back to life. I was coming back to life. The community, which had at first been distant and wary, began to thaw. The waitress at the diner started calling me Hun and would slip me an extra piece of pie. Sal from the hardware store dropped off a cord of firewood one afternoon, claiming his own shed was full. People saw the work I was doing. They saw me not as a problem to be managed, but as one of them, a neighbor. Finally, after 6 months of relentless work and legal maneuvering, the day of the custody hearing came. I stood before a judge in a borrowed suit from Mr. Henderson, my heart pounding. He presented a mountain of evidence: photos of the restored cabin, my bank statements showing a responsible use of funds, letters of support from Sal and Mr. Henderson, and even the town clerk. He painted a picture of stability, of commitment. My new caseworker, a young man who seemed overwhelmed by the whole unusual situation, argued against it. He talked about my age, my lack of a steady job, the isolation of the property. The judge, a stern-faced woman, listened to it all without expression. Then she turned to me. "Mr. Vance," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet courtroom, "why should I place your sister in your care?" I looked at her, and I didn't give the answer Mr. Henderson had coached me to give. I just told the truth. "Because we're all we have left," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Because that cabin isn't just a building, it's a promise I made to her, and a promise my grandmother made to me. It's our home, and she deserves to be home." The judge looked at me for a long time. Then she looked at the file, at the photos of the cabin with its clean new porch and the wisp of smoke curling from its chimney. "Petition granted," she said. I picked Maya up from the group home a week later. She walked out carrying a single cardboard box with her belongings, looking small and lost. When she saw me leaning against the old truck, she stopped. Then she ran. I caught her in a hug, and for the first time in 2 years, I felt whole. When we drove up the dirt track to the cabin, she was silent. She looked at the little house, smoke rising from the chimney, a welcoming light in the window. She looked at the porch I had built, the garden I had planted. "You did this?" she whispered, her eyes wide. "We did this," I said. That night I showed her the cave. I told her everything. About our parents, about Gran, about the footlocker and the documents and the danger. I laid our family's secret history out for her under the smooth stone ceiling of our sanctuary. She listened, her face pale in the lantern light, tears running down her cheeks. When I was finished, she didn't say anything for a long time. She just walked over to the workbench and ran her fingers over the tools, over the dusty jars. "So Gran was a spy?" she finally asked, a small, watery smile on her face. "Something like that," I said. "And this is our bat cave?" I laughed, a real deep laugh. "Yeah, Maya, this is our bat cave." It wasn't a place to hide anymore. It was our headquarters. It was the heart of our new life. It had saved us not by hiding us from the world, but by giving us a place from which to face it. A year has passed since that day. The legal battle with Pioneer Ridge grinds on, a slow war of attrition fought by Mr. Henderson in courtrooms and offices I never see. They know we won't be scared off. They know we have a lawyer who won't be bought. The immediate threat has receded, replaced by a long, uncertain stalemate. And that's a victory. Life has found a rhythm. I got a job working with Sal at the hardware store. It's not glamorous, but it's steady. It pays the bills. Maya started at the local school. She was quiet and withdrawn at first, but now she has friends. She's joined the art club. She fills the cabin with her drawings, taping them to the walls, bringing color and life into every corner. The cave has become her studio. She says the quiet helps her think. I see her down there sometimes, surrounded by Gran's strange tools and our family's dangerous secrets, sketching furiously in her notebook, creating a new world on paper. We got a dog, a scruffy mutt from the local shelter that we named Henderson. He spends his days chasing squirrels and his nights sleeping in a warm patch on the floor between our rooms. The cabin is no longer a project, it's a home. It's small and imperfect, filled with mismatched furniture and the constant presence of sawdust, but it's ours. Every nail, every board is a testament to our survival. Sometimes, late at night, I walk out onto the porch and look up at the stars. The sky out here is so dark you can see the Milky Way. I think about my grandmother. I think about her incredible, heartbreaking sacrifice. She didn't leave us money or an easy life. She left us something far more valuable. She left us a story that made sense of our lives. She left us a piece of ground to call our own. And she left us a choice, to be victims or to be fighters. Inheritance, I've learned, isn't about what you're given. It's about what you choose to do with it. The cave in the forest, this secret place of refuge, it saved us. But not in the way you might think. It didn't save us with treasure. It saved us by giving us a foundation. It gave us the truth. It gave us the means to fight back. And most importantly, it gave us a place to be a family again. It turned out that the safest place in the world wasn't a fortress of stone, but a tiny wooden house filled with love and a stubborn refusal to be broken. That was Gran's real gift. That was the real inheritance. This journey taught me that home isn't a place you find, it's a place you build. Sometimes you have to build it out of the wreckage of your past. Sometimes you have to defend it with everything you have. And sometimes the foundations of that home are hidden away in a place no one else can see. A place of quiet strength inside you. If this story reached you today, if it made you think about your own cave, your own source of hidden strength, then I hope you'll join our community here. These stories are for anyone who has ever had to fight for their place in the world. Subscribe and hit that notification bell because your story matters, and we want to create a space where those stories can be heard. I want you to do something for me. In the comments below, tell me about a time you had to build your own home, literally or metaphorically. What did it teach you about strength and resilience? I'll be reading through them because your experiences, your struggles, and your victories are part of a larger story we're all writing together. Thank you for listening. And remember, no matter how dark it gets, you always have a place to stand your ground. You just have to be brave enough to find it.